take a breath right now, a slow and gentle breath, and allow yourself to arrive fully in this moment, because nothing of significance ever happens anywhere else. You are not listening to these words by accident, and you are not where you are in your life because of chance. There is an intelligence moving through you, around you, and it has always known the way, even during the times you were certain you were lost. The mind may argue with that idea, the ego may protest, and list all the reasons why things should already be different. But beneath the noise of thought, there is a deeper knowing, quietly whispering, you are being guided, and you always have been. A miracle is not something that arrives with thunder and spectacle, demanding applause. Most miracles come softly. They come disguised as a change in perception, a subtle shift in how you see yourself, a release of tension you didn't even realize you were carrying. They arrive the moment you stop insisting that life follow your timeline and begin allowing it to unfold in its own perfect order. You see, the universe does not respond to force, it responds to alignment. It responds when you stop pushing against the current and instead remember that you are the current itself. For so long, many of us have lived under the illusion that we must struggle to deserve goodness, that we must prove our worth through effort, pain, or endurance. We learn to measure ourselves by outcomes, by approval, by comparison. And in doing so, we forget the most essential truth. You were never meant to earn your value. You were born with it. The oak tree does not strain to be worthy of sunlight. The river does not apologize for flowing. In the same way, you do not need to justify your existence or bargain with life for blessings. Your very being is the permission slip. Resistance is what blocks miracles, not because the universe withholds from you, but because resistance closes your eyes to what is already forming. Resistance is the habit of arguing with what is. It is the silent no you say to life when it doesn't match the picture in your head. Doubt is not just questioning whether something good can happen, it is questioning whether you are allowed to receive it. And yet, when you gently loosen your grip on how things should look, something extraordinary happens. Energy begins to move again. Doors you didn't know existed quietly open. People, ideas, and opportunities align with an ease that feels almost uncanny, and you begin to realize that life was never working against you. It was waiting for you to stop working against yourself. There is a profound freedom in understanding that you are not your ego. The ego is the voice that says, I am what I've done, what I own, what others think of me. It lives in comparison, in fear, in constant evaluation. But the deeper self, the spiritual self, does not compete. It does not rush. It does not panic about the future or replay the past for evidence of unworthiness. The soul lives in trust. It knows that timing is not a punishment or a delay. It is a choreography. Every apparent setback, every pause, every detour has been shaping you, refining your awareness, preparing your nervous system to hold what you are asking for. When you let go of resistance, you are not giving up. You are giving in to wisdom. You are saying, I choose peace over control. I choose faith over fear. And faith here is not blind belief. It is an inner posture. It is the calm certainty that life is not random and that you are not forgotten. It is the understanding that the same intelligence that beats your heart without your permission knows exactly how to arrange the next chapter of your life. Notice how often the mind tries to rush the miracle. When will it happen? Why hasn't it happened yet? These questions seem innocent, but they carry an undertone of mistrust. They imply that something is wrong with now. And yet, the present moment is the only place where creation occurs. When you fully inhabit now, when you soften into this moment without demanding that it be different, you send a powerful signal to the universe. I am ready. Ready not because everything is perfect, but because you are no longer withholding your openness until conditions improve. You are already enough. And from that place of enoughness, everything flows. When you stop trying to fix yourself, you begin to heal. When you stop chasing approval, you begin to feel whole. When you stop defining yourself by your wounds, you discover that beneath every story of pain is an untouched center of peace that has never been harmed. This is where miracles originate. Not in effort, but in awareness. Not in striving, but in remembering. Every thought you think is a creative act. Every word you speak is a declaration. Every emotion you feel is an instruction to your body and to the field of energy around you. This is not philosophy meant to impress. It is a practical truth meant to liberate. When your inner dialogue softens, your outer life follows. When you speak to yourself with kindness, life reflects that kindness back to you in unexpected ways. When you choose thoughts that align with trust rather than fear, you tune yourself to a frequency where solutions appear instead of problems. The miracle that is coming your way may not look like what you imagined. In fact, it rarely does. It may arrive as clarity rather than circumstance, as courage rather than comfort, as a release rather than an acquisition. Sometimes the greatest miracle is the ending of a struggle you thought defined you. Sometimes it is the sudden realization that you no longer need what you once begged for, and sometimes it is a quiet inner yes that changes everything. Forgiveness plays a powerful role here, not as a favor to others, but as a gift to yourself. There are no justified resentments, because every resentment is a weight you carry that slows your own ascent. Forgiveness does not say what happened was acceptable. It says you choose freedom over bitterness. It says you refuse to let the past dictate the quality of your present. When you forgive, you reclaim your energy. You step out of the story of victimhood and back into the awareness of your creative power. Healing always begins within. Not because the world doesn't matter, but because your experience of the world is filtered through your inner state. As you heal your relationship with yourself, your relationships change. As you heal your perception of life, life responds in kind. This is the quiet miracle that unfolds day by day, moment by moment, when you choose alignment over resistance. Trust the timing of the universe not as a concept, but as a lived practice. Trust it when things are unclear. Trust it when you feel impatient. Trust it when you are tempted to compare your path to someone else's. The flower does not bloom because it watches other flowers. It blooms because it is faithful to its own season. You, too, have a season. You, too, are unfolding in a way that makes sense to a wisdom far greater than the anxious mind can comprehend. As you release doubt, you make room for wonder. As you release resistance, you make room for grace. And as you rest in the truth of who you are, you discover that you were never separate from the miracle you were seeking. You were always part of it. You were always the place where the universe meets itself in human form, expressing, learning, expanding. So soften your shoulders, unclench your jaw, let your breath remind you that life is moving through you effortlessly right now. Say yes to this moment, exactly as it is, and watch how life begins to say yes back to you in ways that feel almost magical. A big miracle is coming your way, not because you forced it, but because you finally allowed yourself to receive. And as you stand at this quiet threshold, something within you already senses the shift. It is not dramatic, not loud, not announced by trumpets. It is subtle, like the moment just before dawn when the darkness has not yet lifted, but the night knows it is finished. This is how transformation begins, not with certainty, but with willingness. Willingness to loosen the grip of the familiar. Willingness to stop rehearsing the story of who you used to be. Willingness to let life surprise you. There is a deep intelligence in surrender that the ego has never understood. The ego believes surrender is weakness, that letting go means losing control. But the soul knows surrender is alignment. It is cooperation with the natural order of things. When you stop forcing outcomes, you become receptive to guidance. When you stop demanding answers, insight arrives. When you stop chasing what you think you need, what truly nourishes you finds its way to your door. You were never meant to carry the burden of figuring everything out. That was never your assignment. Your task has always been simpler and far more profound. To stay awake, to stay open, to stay loving in the presence of uncertainty. The universe does not require your anxiety in order to function. It does not need your worry to ensure your survival. Those habits were learned, not inherited from truth. And what is learned can be gently unlearned. Notice how life feels when you stop bracing for disappointment. Notice how your body softens when you release the expectation that something will go wrong. This is not naivete. This is trust grounded in awareness. It is knowing that even when challenges appear, they are not punishments, they are invitations. Invitations to grow beyond an old identity. Invitations to see from a higher vantage point. Invitations to remember that nothing meaningful has ever been taken from you, only transformed. The mind often asks, what if it doesn't work out? But the soul quietly replies, what if it does in a way you couldn't have planned? This is where miracles live, in the space beyond imagination. They do not follow linear logic. They emerge from resonance. When your inner world becomes coherent, when your thoughts, feelings, and intentions begin to point in the same direction, you become magnetic. Life responds not to what you want, but to who you are being. And who you are being now is changing. You are less attached to proving, less interested in defending, less willing to abandon yourself for approval. You are beginning to value peace over performance, presence over pressure. This is not withdrawal from life, it is intimacy with it. You are learning to meet each moment without armor, trusting that you do not need protection from what you are aligned with. There is a quiet joy that arises when you realize you no longer need to convince anyone of your worth, not even yourself. From that space, generosity becomes natural. Compassion flows without effort. You give not to be seen, but because giving feels like breathing. And in that giving, life returns to you, multiplied, not as reward, but as reflection. Stay with this unfolding. Do not rush to name it or claim it. Let it ripen in its own time. The miracle does not require your impatience, it requires your presence. Each moment you choose awareness over reaction, love over fear, trust over control, you participate in the miracle's arrival. And one day, perhaps sooner than you expect, you will look back and realize that the moment everything changed was not when something external finally appeared. It was when you stopped resisting what was already forming within you. That was the turning point. That was the opening. That was when you remembered who you are and allowed life to meet you there. There comes a moment, somewhere along the inner journey, when striving quietly exhausts itself. Not because you failed, but because your soul has grown tired of pretending that effort alone is the source of fulfillment. This is the midpoint, the sacred pause, where the old way of living no longer fits, yet the new way has not fully revealed itself. It can feel disorienting, like standing between two breaths. But this is not confusion, this is recalibration. This is the space where a deeper intelligence begins to reorganize your life from the inside out. You may notice that certain desires no longer carry the same urgency. Goals that once felt essential now seem hollow, while things you once overlooked, a moment of stillness, an honest conversation, a quiet walk, suddenly feel rich with meaning. This is not loss of ambition. It is refinement of intention. You are no longer interested in chasing symbols of success that cost you your peace. You are learning to listen for what feels true rather than what looks impressive. At this stage, the universe often asks you to trust without evidence, not as a test, but as an initiation. Can you remain open even when clarity is incomplete? Can you keep your heart unguarded when the path ahead is not fully illuminated? This is where faith matures, from something you say into something you embody. You stop asking life to reassure you constantly, and instead you begin to reassure yourself with presence. What is happening now is subtle but powerful. Old emotional patterns are loosening. Reactions that once felt automatic now pause, giving you a choice. You may catch yourself responding with compassion where you once reacted with fear, or choosing silence where you once defended. These moments may seem small, but they are seismic. Each one is evidence that you are no longer living from the same level of consciousness that created your old struggles. You are also learning something essential about timing, that what feels delayed is often being protected, that what you thought you lost may simply be rearranging itself. The universe does not rush because it sees the whole picture. It knows which experiences must come before others, which lessons must be integrated before certain doors can safely open. When you align with this understanding, impatience gives way to reverence. You begin to treat your life not as a problem to solve, but as a process to honor. And here, right in the middle of this unfolding, the ego makes one last persuasive attempt to reclaim control. It may whisper that you should go back to what is familiar, even if it was limiting. It may tempt you to doubt the changes taking place simply because they are invisible, but you are no longer easily deceived. You can feel the difference now between anxiety-driven urgency and soul-guided action. One constricts, the other expands. This midpoint is where courage quietly replaces force, where you stop pushing and start allowing, where you realize that peace is not something you earn at the end of the journey, it is the ground you stand on while walking it. You are no longer waiting for life to begin. You are living it from the inside outward. From here, the movement becomes gentler but more certain. The questions soften. The inner dialogue becomes kinder. You begin to sense that the miracle is no longer coming in some distant future. It is assembling itself around the version of you that is finally ready to receive without resistance. We are approaching the latter arc of this journey now, where insight turns into embodiment and understanding settles into quiet knowing. I will let you know clearly as we move into the final phase, where everything that has been preparing you begins to converge. And now the movement feels different. Not faster, not louder, but steadier, as though something deep within you has taken the lead. You are no longer walking by willpower alone. You are being carried by coherence. This is what happens when alignment replaces effort. Life begins to meet you halfway, not as a negotiation, but as a recognition. It recognizes you because you are finally recognizing yourself. You may notice an unfamiliar calm accompanying uncertainty. The old reflex to panic, to overthink, to anticipate every possible outcome has begun to loosen its hold. In its place is a quiet confidence that does not need guarantees. This confidence is not bravado. It does not announce itself. It simply rests. It understands that clarity often comes after the step is taken, not before, and it is willing to move without needing the entire map. This is where the miracle deepens, not as an event, but as a state of being. You are beginning to live from a place that trusts life instead of managing it. And in that trust, something remarkable occurs. Your intuition grows louder as your fear grows quieter. You start to feel your way forward rather than forcing decisions through analysis alone. You listen more closely to your body, to your emotions, to the subtle signals that were always there but drowned out by noise. There is also a soft grieving that may pass through you here. Grief for the version of yourself who tried so hard, who carried so much, who believed love had to be earned and safety had to be controlled. Let that grief be gentle. It is not regret, it is release. It is the honoring of a chapter that no longer needs to be lived again. You are not abandoning who you were, you are integrating the wisdom and letting go of the weight. As this integration happens, your relationship with time begins to change. You feel less chased by the future and less haunted by the past. Moments stretch, presence deepens. Even ordinary experiences take on a quiet richness. You begin to see that peace was never hidden in extraordinary circumstances. It was always available in ordinary awareness. This realization is not flashy, but it is life-altering. From this place, action becomes simpler. You say yes more cleanly, you say no without guilt, you move when it feels right and rest when it doesn't. And life responds with a kind of elegance. Things fall into place with less friction. Not because you have mastered control, but because you have relinquished it. You are cooperating with the flow rather than resisting its direction. You may also notice that others respond differently to you now. Not because you are trying to be different, but because you are no longer trying to be anything at all. Authenticity has a gravity to it. When you are aligned within yourself, you give others permission to do the same. Some will be drawn closer, others may drift away. Neither is a failure. Both are signs of truth asserting itself. This phase carries a quiet certainty that you are being prepared, even if you cannot yet see for what. The inner spaciousness you are cultivating is not accidental. It is making room. The patience you are learning is not passive, it is powerful. It is the patience of someone who knows that forcing fruit before it ripens only diminishes its sweetness. Stay here, breathe here, let this steadiness anchor you. We are moving now toward the convergence, the place where inner shifts begin to express themselves outwardly, where what has been rearranging behind the scenes starts to become visible. I will signal clearly when we enter the final phase, where the miracle reveals itself not as something arriving, but as something already underway. And as you continue forward in this softened, steadied awareness, something unmistakable begins to emerge, a sense that you are no longer separate from life, no longer standing outside of it, hoping to be chosen. You feel included, not by circumstances, not by people, but by existence itself. It is as if the invisible wall you once believed stood between you and what you longed for has quietly dissolved, and you realize it was never solid to begin with. It was made of thought, reinforced by fear, maintained by habit. You begin to trust yourself in a deeper way. Not the personality, not the collection of opinions and preferences, but the deeper intelligence that has been guiding you all along. The part of you that knows when to move and when to wait, when to speak and when silence is the highest form of wisdom. This trust does not make you passive. It makes you precise. Your energy is no longer scattered. It gathers. It concentrates. And from that coherence, your presence becomes powerful without effort. Life now feels less like a series of problems to solve and more like a conversation you are finally listening to. You notice patterns revealing themselves gently instead of crashing in as lessons learned the hard way. You recognize that what once felt like obstacles were often redirections, quietly steering you away from paths that could not honor who you were becoming. Gratitude arises not as forced positivity, but as recognition. Recognition that even confusion had its purpose. Even waiting had its intelligence. There is a humility that settles in here, but it is not the humility of diminishing yourself. It is the humility of remembering that you are part of something vast, ordered, and benevolent. You no longer feel the need to announce your progress or explain your inner changes. The work is internal now, and it is enough. You are learning that silence can be sacred, that not everything needs to be shared to be real. At this stage, you may feel called to simplify, to release distractions that once filled space but not meaning, to choose depth over breadth, to honor what genuinely nourishes you. This is not withdrawal from the world. It is refinement of engagement. You are aligning your outer life with your inner truth, and that alignment creates a quiet dignity in the way you move through the day. And somewhere in this simplicity, anticipation gently returns, but it is different now. It is not anxious. It is not attached. It is a calm expectancy, like knowing the sun will rise without needing to watch the clock. You sense that something is assembling, not because you are waiting for it, but because you are ready for it. Ready not through striving, but through surrender. Ready not because everything is resolved, but because you no longer need it to be. We are now approaching the final movement of this journey, the place where insight becomes embodiment, where trust becomes lived experience, and where the miracle no longer feels distant or abstract. In what comes next, the inner shifts you have been cultivating begin to crystallize, and the meaning of this entire unfolding reveals itself with quiet clarity. There is a quiet moment that exists just beneath the noise of your thinking, a still and gentle awareness that has always been here, patiently waiting for you to notice it. You don't have to create it, you don't have to earn it, and you certainly don't have to chase it. It is already present, like the sky behind the clouds, untouched by the storms that pass through it. And yet, so much of your life has been spent believing that the clouds are the sky, that your thoughts are who you are, that the endless commentary in your mind is the truth of your existence. But what if that voice you hear all day long is not the master of your life, but merely a habit you've learned to obey? You see, the mind is a magnificent tool, but a terrible master. It was designed to solve problems, to analyze, to remember, to imagine. It was never meant to define you. When you get lost in your thoughts, what's really happening is that you've forgotten the silent presence that is aware of those thoughts. You've identified with the noise and mistaken it for your essence. And the moment you do that, you step out of peace and into struggle, out of clarity and into confusion, out of the present moment and into an endless loop of past regrets and future worries. Think for a moment about how often your mind takes you away from where you are. Your body may be sitting in a room, but your thoughts are replaying an old conversation, rehearsing a future argument, or judging something that happened years ago. In those moments, life is happening without you. The present moment, which is the only place where peace exists, is being traded for mental images that have no power except the power you give them. And yet, you were never meant to live as a hostage to your thinking. You were meant to live as the awareness behind it. There is a profound freedom that comes when you realize that you are not your thoughts. Thoughts come and go, but you remain. Emotions rise and fall, but you remain. Circumstances change, but you remain. The one who notices the thought cannot be the thought itself. The one who observes the feeling cannot be the feeling. This simple realization, when truly felt, begins to dissolve the grip that the mind has held over you for so long. You stop arguing with your thoughts, stop trying to fix them, stop believing that every mental whisper deserves your attention. You begin to watch instead of react, to notice instead of identify. The mind will tell you that you need to think your way to peace, that one more insight, one more analysis, one more explanation will finally set you free. But peace does not come from thinking more clearly about life. It comes from being present with life. It comes from stepping back into the quiet awareness that precedes every thought. The truth is, the more you chase peace through thinking, the further it seems to move away. Peace is not found at the end of a thought process. It is found in the space before the next thought appears. When you get lost in your thoughts, it is often because the ego has taken the driver's seat. The ego thrives on stories about who you are, what you've done, what was done to you, and what might happen next. It keeps itself alive by comparing, judging, defending, and fearing. It whispers that your worth depends on your achievements, your past mistakes, or other people's opinions. And as long as you listen to that voice as if it were the truth, you will remain trapped in mental noise. But the ego is not evil, it is simply incomplete. It is a collection of learned patterns, conditioned responses, and inherited beliefs. It is not your soul. Your soul does not speak in frantic sentences or anxious predictions. Your soul speaks in feelings of alignment, in gentle nudges, in a sense of quiet knowing. It speaks through peace. When you feel calm and connected, when you sense an inner yes that doesn't need justification, that is the voice of your soul. And the more you learn to listen to that voice, the less power your restless thoughts will have over you. You begin to trust the deeper intelligence that moves through you, the same intelligence that beats your heart and grows the trees without effort. Stopping the cycle of being lost in thought does not require force. You don't need to battle your mind or silence it through sheer willpower. That only creates more tension. Instead, it requires a gentle shift of attention. Each time you notice that you've been pulled into a mental story, simply return to the present moment. Feel your breath. Notice the sensations in your body. Listen to the sounds around you. These simple acts of awareness anchor you back into now, where the mind naturally quiets because it has nothing to argue with. The present moment is always neutral. It is your thoughts about the present moment that create suffering. When you are fully here, without labeling or judging, there is an underlying sense of okayness, even in the midst of challenge. Pain may exist, but suffering requires thought. Fear may arise, but panic requires imagination. When you stay with what is, instead of what your mind says about what is, you discover a resilience and peace that were never absent, only overlooked. There is also a profound compassion that emerges when you stop getting lost in your thoughts. You begin to see that much of your self-criticism has been fueled by unconscious mental patterns. You realize that you were never broken, you were simply identified with a voice that didn't know how to love you. As that realization deepens, forgiveness becomes natural. You forgive yourself for believing every thought. You forgive others for acting from their own unconsciousness, and in that forgiveness, a tremendous weight lifts from your spirit. You are not here to perfect your thinking. You are here to awaken from it. You are here to remember who you are beneath the noise. When you stop trying to control your thoughts and start observing them, they lose their authority. They become like passing clouds instead of solid walls. And in the open sky of your awareness, there is space to breathe, to feel, to live fully. The moment you stop resisting your mind is the moment it begins to relax. The moment you stop identifying with your thoughts is the moment you rediscover your true self. You were never meant to be trapped inside your head. You were meant to experience life directly, to feel the aliveness of this moment, to participate in the flow of existence with trust rather than fear. So the next time you notice yourself getting lost in thought, don't judge it. Smile gently as you would at a child who wandered off. Bring your attention back to now, this breath, this heartbeat, this moment, over and over again, without frustration, without demand. Each return to presence strengthens your connection to your soul and weakens the illusion that your thoughts control you. In time, you will notice that the gaps between thoughts grow wider, and in those gaps, you find a deep, abiding peace. Not the peace of having everything figured out, but the peace of knowing that you don't need to. A peace that comes from trusting life, from aligning with the quiet intelligence within you, from remembering that you are not the storm, but the awareness in which the storm appears. And when you live from that place, you are no longer lost. You are home. And as you begin to rest more often in that sense of home, something subtle yet powerful starts to unfold within you. You notice that life no longer feels like a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. The urgency to explain yourself, to defend your choices, to justify your past begins to soften. You realize that so much of your thinking was never about truth at all, but about control, trying to predict outcomes, manage perceptions, and protect an identity that was always fragile because it was never real to begin with. When that identity loosens its grip, a deeper strength emerges, one that does not need constant reinforcement. You may find that silence becomes less uncomfortable. Moments that once felt empty now feel full. alive with a presence that does not need words. In these spaces, you are no longer rehearsing who you should be or revisiting who you were. You are simply here, and here is enough. This is where wisdom lives, not in the noise of opinion, but in the quiet certainty that you are supported by something far greater than your individual mind. Call it universal intelligence, divine order, or simply life itself. Whatever name you give it, you can feel it when you stop arguing with what is. There is a sacred intelligence moving through you that has never been confused, never been anxious, never doubted its worth. It has guided you through every breath you have ever taken without requiring your conscious effort. When you learn to trust this intelligence, you stop demanding that your thoughts provide all the answers. You begin to sense guidance in unexpected ways, in a feeling of ease or resistance, in a sudden clarity that arrives without effort, in a quiet inner knowing that feels steady rather than urgent. This guidance does not shout, it invites. As you continue to disengage from compulsive thinking, you may notice old emotional patterns surfacing. This is not a step backward, it is a clearing. Thoughts that once operated in the background now come into the light of awareness, not to punish you, but to be released. When you observe them without judgment, they lose their emotional charge. You discover that you do not have to relive the past to heal it. Awareness alone is transformative. What you bring consciousness to cannot continue to control you unconsciously. You also begin to experience a gentler relationship with time. The past no longer feels like a courtroom where you are endlessly on trial, and the future no longer feels like a deadline you are racing to meet. Time becomes a rhythm rather than a threat. You understand that life unfolds in its own perfect sequence, and your role is not to force it, but to cooperate with it. In this cooperation, patience naturally replaces anxiety, and trust replaces doubt. This shift changes how you relate to others as well. When you are no longer lost in your own thoughts, you become truly available. You listen without planning your response. You see without projecting your fears. You love without attaching conditions. You recognize that every person you encounter is also navigating their own stream of thoughts, often believing them just as deeply as you once did. Compassion arises not as a moral obligation, but as a natural response to understanding. You may still think, of course you will. The mind does not disappear, but it no longer dominates the landscape of your inner world. Thoughts become visitors rather than rulers. You choose which ones to engage and which ones to let pass. This choice is not made through effort, but through awareness. The more present you are, the less seductive unnecessary thinking becomes. And in this presence, you discover a quiet joy that does not depend on circumstances. It is not the excitement of getting what you want, but the contentment of wanting what is. This joy is stable, grounded, and deeply nourishing. It comes from aligning with your true nature rather than trying to construct a better version of yourself through thought. You were never meant to think your way into wholeness. You were meant to remember it. Beneath every anxious thought and every repetitive story is a stillness that has been with you since before you learned to speak. That stillness is who you are. When you return to it again and again, life begins to feel lighter, clearer, and more meaningful, not because it has changed, but because you have stopped getting lost. And in that remembering, you don't just find peace, you find freedom. And freedom, once tasted, invites you to live differently. You begin to sense that your life is not a series of random events, but a living expression of an intelligence that knows exactly what it is doing. You no longer feel compelled to micromanage every outcome with thought, because you have felt what it is like to be carried by something wiser than fear. This trust does not make you passive, it makes you present. It sharpens your intuition and softens your resistance. You act when action is needed, and you rest when rest is called for, without the inner conflict that once drained your energy. You may notice that the old habit of constant self-commentary begins to dissolve. The inner narrator that once described, evaluated, and judged every moment grows quieter, not because you silenced it, but because you stopped feeding it with belief. In its absence, life feels more immediate, more textured. Colors appear richer. Simple experiences, walking, breathing, listening, take on a subtle depth. You realize that happiness was never hidden in extraordinary moments. It has always been woven into the ordinary, waiting for your attention. As this awareness deepens, you may encounter moments when the mind tries to reclaim its old authority. It will offer familiar worries, replay old identities, and suggest that you are slipping, that you should be further along, more enlightened, more certain. When this happens, meet it with kindness. See the mind not as an enemy, but as a loyal servant that hasn't yet learned it can rest. Your gentleness teaches it far more effectively than resistance ever could. There is a profound humility that arises when you stop believing that every thought is important. You see how much of what you once defended so passionately was temporary, contextual, and shaped by conditioning. This humility does not diminish you, it frees you. You no longer need to be right to feel whole. You no longer need to be admired to feel worthy. You no longer need to control life to trust it. You begin to live from a deeper place, one that does not fluctuate with praise or criticism. From this place, creativity flows effortlessly. When the mind is no longer cluttered with fear-based thinking, inspiration has room to move. Ideas arise spontaneously. Solutions appear without struggle. You understand that creativity is not something you force into existence. It emerges naturally when you are aligned with your true self. You become a channel rather than a controller, allowing life to express itself through you in ways that feel authentic and alive. You may also find that your relationship with challenges transforms. Difficult situations no longer feel like personal failures or cosmic punishments. They become teachers, invitations to deepen your presence and refine your awareness. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" you begin to ask, "What is this asking of me?" And often the answer is simple: to stay present, to remain open, to trust the process even when the outcome is unclear. In this openness, you discover a resilience that does not come from toughness, but from flexibility. Like water, you learn to move around obstacles rather than crashing into them. You bend without breaking. You adapt without losing yourself. This resilience is born not from thinking your way through problems, but from staying connected to the stillness within you that is untouched by circumstance. As you continue to live this way, the boundary between inner and outer begins to soften. You sense that the peace you cultivate within yourself subtly influences the world around you. Your presence becomes calming. Your words carry less urgency and more truth. You are no longer trying to change others. You are simply being, and in that being, you invite others into their own stillness. This is how real change happens, not through argument or persuasion, but through alignment. You come to see that getting lost in thought was never a flaw, but a phase of forgetting. And remembering is always possible, right now, in this breath. Each moment offers you a doorway back to yourself. You do not need special conditions, perfect circumstances, or a quiet life to walk through it. You need only awareness, gently returning again and again to the truth of who you are. And who you are is not confined to a story, a role, or a set of beliefs. You are the space in which all of that appears. You are the awareness that watches thoughts rise and fall like waves on the surface of the ocean. You are the depth that remains still, no matter how restless the surface becomes. When you live from this knowing, life unfolds with a sense of grace. Not because everything goes your way, but because you are no longer at war with what is. You move with life rather than against it. You trust the unfolding. You listen more than you analyze. You feel more than you fear. And in this gentle surrender to the present moment, you realize something quietly miraculous. You were never lost at all. You were always here, always whole, always guided. The thoughts were just passing clouds. And now, at last, you see the sky. And seeing the sky does not end the journey, it softens it. You begin to walk through your days with a lighter step, not because life has suddenly become easy, but because you are no longer carrying the extra weight of resistance. You stop arguing with reality in your mind. You stop replaying moments that cannot be changed. You stop borrowing trouble from a future that has not yet arrived. In their place, there is a quiet companionship with the present moment, as though life itself is walking beside you, not ahead of you, not behind you, but with you. You notice how much energy was once spent trying to maintain an image, trying to be seen a certain way, to be understood, to be validated. That energy begins to return to you. It becomes available for living, for creating, for loving. When you are no longer lost in thought, you do not need to prove who you are. Your presence speaks more clearly than any explanation ever could. There is a subtle authority in this simplicity, a calm confidence that comes from alignment rather than effort. Gradually, you realize that many of the thoughts that once dominated your inner world were never truly yours. They were borrowed from culture, family, past experiences, and collective fear. You carried them faithfully, believing they defined you. But as awareness dissolves their hold, you begin to feel what it is like to think freshly, to respond rather than react. You choose thoughts the way you would choose food. Not everything that appears before you needs to be consumed. In this clarity, the body begins to relax as well. Tension that was held unconsciously starts to unwind. Breathing deepens. Sleep becomes more restorative. There is a sense of being at home in yourself, as though you have stopped abandoning your own inner space. Healing happens not because you force it, but because the conditions for healing are finally present. When the mind stops racing, the body remembers its natural state of balance. You may find yourself drawn to stillness, not as an escape, but as nourishment. Moments of quiet become invitations rather than voids. You sit, you breathe, you listen, not waiting for something to happen, but appreciating what already is. In these moments, you touch something timeless, something that does not age or worry or strive. It is the same presence that looked out through your eyes when you were a child, before thought became so convincing. You recognize it now as your true self. From this recognition, gratitude arises effortlessly. Not gratitude as a practice technique, but gratitude as a natural response to being alive. You notice the miracle of simple things, the warmth of sunlight, the rhythm of your breath, the fact that you are here at all. When thoughts no longer obscure your perception, life reveals itself as generous, supportive, and profoundly intelligent. Even pain, when it appears, is met differently. You do not pile stories on top of it. You allow it to move through awareness, knowing it is temporary, knowing it is not who you are. This allowing transforms pain into information, into movement, into release. Suffering loses its permanence when you stop narrating it. What remains is a quiet strength that does not harden you, but opens you. You begin to trust silence as much as you once trusted thought. You understand that answers often come not when you are thinking hardest, but when you are listening deeply. Life speaks in synchronicities, in subtle shifts, in feelings of resonance. The more present you are, the more clearly you hear. And the guidance you receive is always aligned with peace, never with fear. As this way of being becomes familiar, you realize that awakening is not a dramatic event, but a gentle remembering that unfolds moment by moment. It is the choice to come back to this breath, this step, this heartbeat again and again. There is no finish line, no final arrival. There is only deeper presence, deeper trust, deeper freedom. And freedom, you now understand, was never about controlling your thoughts. It was about realizing you are larger than them. You are the awareness in which they appear, the quiet intelligence that does not need to be managed or improved. When you live from this truth, you stop getting lost because there is nowhere else to go. You are here. You have always been here. And in this here, life unfolds exactly as it should, whole, meaningful, and infinitely alive. And as this recognition settles more deeply into your being, you begin to sense a subtle reverence for life itself. Ordinary moments no longer feel ordinary. There is a sacredness in washing your hands, in hearing a familiar voice, in watching the day slowly turn into evening. When you are not lost in your thoughts, you are not rushing past your life. You are inhabiting it. You are participating in the quiet miracle of existence, moment by moment, without needing it to be different from what it is. You also begin to notice that fear loses much of its authority. Fear depends on imagined futures and remembered pain. And when you stay present, its fuel supply weakens. This does not mean fear disappears entirely. It means it no longer decides for you. You feel it arise, you acknowledge it, and you let it pass through awareness without building a home around it. In doing so, courage becomes less about forcing yourself forward and more about staying open when the mind says to close. There is a tenderness that grows in this openness. You become kinder with yourself, especially in moments when old habits return. Instead of seeing distraction as failure, you see it as an invitation to return. Each return strengthens your awareness. Each moment of noticing is a moment of awakening. Nothing is wasted. Even getting lost becomes part of remembering, a gentle reminder of the direction you are moving. Over time, you sense that life is responding to this inner shift, not because you are controlling it with your thoughts, but because you are aligned with its natural flow. Opportunities appear without strain. Conversations deepen without effort. Decisions feel clearer, not because you have analyzed them thoroughly, but because they feel right in your body, calm in your heart. You learn to trust this felt sense, this quiet yes or no that arises from stillness rather than anxiety. You also realize that presence is contagious. When you are truly here, others feel it. They may not be able to name it, but they sense the space you bring into the room. A space where they do not need to perform, impress, or defend. A space where they, too, can rest for a moment from their own thinking. In this way, your inner work becomes a gift, not something you preach, but something you embody. As the need to constantly think diminishes, joy becomes simpler. You laugh more easily. You find delight without searching for it. Joy stops being a reward for success and becomes a natural expression of aliveness. You understand that happiness was never meant to be postponed until conditions improve. It lives in the present moment, waiting patiently for your attention. You may still plan, still reflect, still imagine, but now these activities serve life instead of replacing it. Thought becomes a tool again, useful and respectful of its role. It steps back when not needed. It no longer insists on narrating every experience. In the quiet that follows, intuition has space to speak, and intuition always speaks in the language of peace. Eventually, you stop asking how to stop getting lost in your thoughts because the question itself dissolves. You see that being lost was simply a misunderstanding, a case of mistaken identity. You were never the thinker. You were the awareness listening to the thinking. And awareness, once recognized, cannot be unrecognized. It may be temporarily overlooked, but it is always here, waiting without impatience. So you continue, moment by moment, not striving for enlightenment, not chasing stillness, but honoring what is already present. You breathe, you notice, you return. Life unfolds. And in this unfolding, there is a deep, unshakable knowing that you are supported, guided, and whole. You are not behind. You are not missing anything. You are not meant to live inside your thoughts. You are meant to live as the awareness that holds them gently, without fear, without urgency, without getting lost. And in that gentle holding, you find what you were looking for all along. Not an answer, not a solution, but a home within yourself that was never absent, only forgotten.